Regenerative Ed is produced by Grounded Teaching and inspired by life and by radical joy, which I am so grateful to some friends this week that reminded me of that because, it's important, especially when things seem kind of messed up or kind of hard. And it's also inspired by you folks who are out there listening and shooting me notes about the podcast or tagging Grounded Teaching and patterns that you see. It's really, really energizing. And just thank you so much for that. And super special thanks to our Patreon supporters who are helping, pay for some of the costs of producing this show. We appreciate you so, so much. Thank you. And I'm feeling really energized today because it's getting warmer outside. I'm getting some plants in the ground today as soon as I sign off. Our little one has swim lessons this evening, which has been super fun to watch. And we usually go out for pizza from this really good kind of bougie place afterwards. So that's good. And also, I just woke up feeling great this morning because I had a dream about teaching last night, which started out like all of my panic teaching dreams where my clothes fall off or I can't find the classroom, classic stuff, including tonight or this morning, for some reason, I was wearing shoes that were making me trip. And I don't know, some Jungian analyst can kind of help me out here, but this dream actually veered away from the typical dreams that end with me waking myself up because they're so stressful or whatnot. But this time, a student actually gave me her shoes because I kept tripping over mine, and her shoes fit. And it literally allowed me to stand up and start teaching. I mean, somebody analyze that, right? So different than other teaching dreams where it ends up with me waking myself up because there are 452 students in one class, right? Or something like that. And I usually hate sharing my dreams, but hey, it's Teacher Appreciation Week. This one was so different and it really meant something to me. It just really filled me with joy today. Speaking of Teacher Appreciation Week, our group for new teachers, We Are Verbs, it officially started on Monday, which is the first day of May. We already have such a solid core group of educators in there. And if you don't know, each month you get a workbook for the month. It's beautiful. It's intentionally put together. It takes you through the month week by week. I'm really proud of it. Plus, there's a live workshop every month that's also recorded in case you can't attend. And this month, the workshop is titled Cultivating New Beginnings and Redefining Endings. And we're talking about bending models of time and taking risks, and we're talking about composting, and it's going to be really awesome. So I hope that you want to join. You have to join We Are Verbs to come to it. And that's great because you don't just get a workshop, you get hooked up with a group of radical, awesome educators. You get some other perks. And this is for any educator, whether you're ECE, college, private, homeschool, whatever it may be. If you spend most of your time working with students, kids, we welcome you because there is so much that we can learn from each other. And we all have the same goal, which is to break free from the industrial educational model and then create a living education model for our kids, right? And why are we doing that? Because of all the reasons that we talk about on this podcast, but it's, a more conscious, empathetic, connected, joyful way to move through the world, I think. And education is a huge vehicle to be able to do that. And so much of how we move through the world has to do with our mental models. So why don't we adopt one where the goal is, thriving life instead of prioritizing a mental model where the goal is something like production, something industrial like that. And hey, it's Teacher Appreciation Week. And so until Saturday at noon ET, you can join for $2 for 2 months for a great group, 2 monthly workbooks, 2 workshops. You may be asking why so cheap? Well, we really believe in what we're doing. We think it's helpful. We want you to check it out. But we also want folks who come to participate, to actually join, to download the workbook, to actually do the thing instead of it just being something that sits in your inbox. And so we're taking that step of asking you to pay a little bit of something for it, even if it's just a little something, to make it more likely that you'll participate. And that helps out the whole group too. Okay, so there you go. The code for that again is Teacher Appreciation. That's all one word. If you're listening to this after May 7th, but you still want to join, we have an ongoing deal for now to join for $1 for the first month using the code podcast. You can join anytime, but the workshop is Tuesday the 10th. So join before that and you can participate live. If you join after that, you can always watch the recording. That's there. Links are in bio to join. So that's that. Let's talk about today. I'm so excited to share with you the last of our podcasts on patterns today, which is the scatterpattern. If you're just joining, we're at the tail end of an 8-pattern series, sort of like a free workshop via podcast pattern series on how patterns and living systems can teach us about life, teaching, all that stuff. You can go back and listen to all of the previous 7 episodes, which are spirals, waves, branches, streamlines, cloud forms, lobes, nets, and then today we're ending it with scatter. And I'm so excited. So let's get into it. Episode 41. We are on to our final pattern, the scatter pattern. I always want to say scatter pattern, but scatter pattern. And we are ending with chaos here with scattering. That's how we're gonna go out with a bang. That's what we're doing here. And you know how we do this? So first off, we aren't hopping into utilitarian, functional sort of things. Do, action. We're just talking about appreciation and beauty and connection, right? And finding patterns everywhere. That might be visually, that might be audibly, that might be patterns of behavior, patterns of emotion, patterns in general. And it helps us to be more conscious humans. It helps us to be more in the present moment, in observation mode. And like we said last week with nuts, that practice of observation allows us to actually catch things that come our way that might nourish us in our everyday mundane lives. So this week, your challenge is to open your awareness to wherever you see a scatter pattern at play, and then take 30 seconds or so to stop, observe, appreciate it, maybe make that part of a daily practice. That's the real work here. So pause for a second now. And if this was a live class, we'd be throwing things up on the board, but just pause for a second and think about where a scatter pattern might happen in a natural system, in our bodies, in a food web, at the cellular level, in weather patterns, in social dynamics, that sort of thing. Pause this and think about it for a minute. When you have a little list, come back to me. And at this point, if you've listened to all the patterns before, and you kind of know how we're doing, you're probably already starting to see how we're going to work through this. I have a little surprise for you because today's a little bit different though, but still have that list there so you can kind of draw your own conclusions as well. So I'm going to start by talking about a book that I read several years ago that blew my mind, and I recommend us all reading it. And it's called The Hidden Life of Trees. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's a must read. Maybe we should actually do a book club on weird verbs. That might be kind of fun. If you think that's a good idea, let me know. Anyways, amongst all the other amazing things that I learned in that book, I remember this statistic so clearly, which is that so many seeds get eaten or don't land in the right soil, or they become diseased, or they dry up. And we're talking about tree seeds. And so scientists have actually calculated that a mother beech tree is the one that they were looking at. It needs to produce 2 million seeds in order for just one seedling to become a full-grown tree. So if you are looking at a full-grown beech tree, you might as well offer your congratulations for winning the life lottery, right? It's a 1 in a 2 million chance. And that's not that different from other forms of life, including humans, where there's, about 280 million sperm swimmers every time, but maybe a little easier to conceptualize seeds than sperm, and maybe easier for students as well, or at least less distracting. Then it blows my mind that there are so many trees, though. Think of how many seeds that is, right? 1 in 2 million sounds incredibly unsuccessful, but our planet, unless we screwed up with clear cutting and pollution and all that stuff, is thriving with plants that came from a seed, a 1 of 2 million or however many seeds. So the mechanism of dispersal, even though it may seem like the rate is low just based on our own conceptual understanding of how, what a volume of 2 million seeds might look like, right? Even though it seems like that, the effect is perfect. The effect is working, right? Trees are growing. So first off, there's a lesson here for me that is ringing really loud and clear that I want to share with you before we get into design. And here it is. So if you tell anyone that only 1 out of 2 million anything will be successful, and for this purpose, we're going to first define success as a full-grown tree that's able to reproduce and keep the species going, which is an important distinction to make. But if you say that only 1 in 2 million will be successful, I'm going to tell you that's probably not worth the effort. And just generally speaking, a 1 in 2 million chance, right? Probably not worth the effort. That's a really, really low statistic. It seems based on my, sort of arbitrary understanding of 2 million. It feels like winning the lottery. And I would say that maybe you should focus on something else, right? And I know that this doesn't apply to everything. It's about scale and it's about time. And but look at what these trees are pulling out, 2 million seeds and one makes it. And it teaches me that it's not really about arbitrary numbers. Like I think 2 million is a lot. It's about how we measure success. And our world is full of trees. So clearly the number 2 million, which sounds like, to so many of us in our brains, it sounds so much. It sounds like so much, right? But it's actually the perfect amount. It is worth it, actually. It is worth it. It's just arbitrary that it sounds like it's a lot to us. We have 37 trillion cells in our body, right? That sounds like a lot too. So I'm not saying that numbers aren't useful, because obviously it depends on what you're measuring, right? They're vital for our modern understanding of how the world works, mathematics, and a lot of things that we have now. But what I'm saying is that sometimes things don't sound like they're worth the effort if we're not getting a million trees out of the million seeds that we, scatter, right? Or at least I would say, okay, maybe you wouldn't get a million trees out of 2 million seeds, but come on, 100 sounds more reasonable, doesn't it, than one? Right? Totally arbitrary about what sounds reasonable or what doesn't, Come on, couldn't it just be like 500, right? I mean, it's 2 million. Can we just get 500 trees? No, one. One is what we get, okay? And that is such a lesson to me. The other lesson here, and I know I'm breaking our format a smidge, but I think it's important, as I was just working with an organization yesterday, we're talking about qualitative versus quantitative goals, how we measure success. And it's really important to note that success in the trees case here is defined by a full-grown tree. And that's important for the longevity of the species, no doubt. But what is happening to all the other trees, all the other seeds, right? Basically, they're becoming a part of the food web in one form or another. A part of this extensive and intricate web of nourishment. And they are increasing organic matter in the soil in one way or another. So it's not a loss. It's not like those seeds scatter into a vacuum or something and then get whisked off into outer space where they'll float away into infinity, or they just poof disappear, right? They add to the biosphere in many very important ways. So we need to redefine the measures of success here just a little bit. And on that same note of redefining measures of success, we have to look at time. So for this podcast, I was actually researching all sorts of scatter patterns. And obviously a volcano came to mind, which is, eruption, spewing all sorts of lava and ash and even glass. I didn't know that, everywhere. And I started thinking, okay, but that explosion isn't actually like good, right? Like, okay, I can see how seeds are good. It's life, or, fertilization, food web. But when you start to think of a volcano, you're like, ash, destruction, not good, right? And so I found loads of websites of folks who were out there, shoveling ash away from their hillsides, like in Iceland, or posts about animals that were covered in ash and the food source being covered in ash. And so these animals were dying, really like terrible suffering, things like that. And it looked really like the opposite of life. Even when you look at a place that has just been decimated by a volcano, it looks like the opposite of life. But then I thought, what, maybe let me look a little closer about this. What's one thing I can do? Oh, let me expand the time frame a little bit, right? Let me Google that, see what happens. Is there something good that happens from ash? And I came to find out from the U.S. Department of Interior, they have a webpage that's devoted to this, that there are some benefits of volcanic ash. And the one that really stuck out to me is that volcanic ash, there's some stuff about gold and copper and being able to mine it and that sort of thing. But one that stuck out to me is that volcanic ash eventually breaks down. And if we go way back in history, those volcanic eruptions have created some of the most fertile soil in the world that have actually allowed civilizations to cultivate the earth and then thrive there, and has created civilizations. We got to look at an expansive enough timeline, but yeah, deep time. So I'm not sure, but it seems like that if volcanic activity was so extensive at one point in the earth, right? There's that whole period where there was a lot of volcanic activity happening, and that created some of the most fertile soils in the world that allowed civilizations to thrive there. I don't know, what seems like destruction that maybe is really terrible destruction in the short period, but in the long game is actually really incredible and life-giving. And it reminds me of how Eckhart Tolle says, who are we to judge what's good and what's bad? Because how can we possibly know how this is going to play out? How can we possibly know? And that really sticks with me. And I think about it almost every day. I think about that almost every day. All right, so we're covering several lessons. We're kind of going off script from how we did the last 7 podcasts. I'm thinking about scatter patterns, but haven't even gotten to what we normally would do in this podcast, which is look at the pattern itself, think about how to apply a scatter pattern in our lives and in our pedagogy or in the structure of our educational systems themselves. So with all of that philosophical stuff in mind about how we're really just a microcosm of everything else, I mean, here's another little tangent, okay? Do you ever feel like a volcano that's about to blow your top? Do you ever feel like a tree that's making so many seeds, but only one like grows up and maybe you don't even see that one? It seems like it's all metaphor. And I mean, at some level, it's obviously a metaphor. But we are also at another level made up of the exact same things as volcanoes and trees, the same elements, folks. I actually looked into this a little bit. Lava is made up of silicon, which is a key mineral in the human body. It's made up of oxygen, right, which is a key element for our life. It's made up of aluminum, iron, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, all things I took in my vitamins this morning because my body is made up of them and needs them. Phosphorus, which makes up my bones and my teeth. Titanium, which I have a very small amount of in my body. There's nothing in lava that isn't in small amounts in our body, right? What about trees? Okay, carbon, yeah. Oxygen, hydrogen. Yeah, we're mostly made up of water. Okay. So really, I'm going out on a limb here and saying that these things feel like a volcano erupting, like a tree doing so. It feels close to us and it feels metaphorical, but also that's partly because we are more connected than we think we are. And so sometimes when these things feel like the perfect metaphor, it's like, yeah, that's because like how living things operate. I'm a living thing, like trees living thing. I'm not saying we're the same. There's amazing characteristics that humans have that trees don't have and vice versa. Clearly, we're created to be different living things on this earth, but we may have more in common than we think. And I think that's helpful to remember. And Indigenous folks know this instinctively, right? Those of us who have been detached from our Indigenous roots because of all sorts of modes of separation, like geographical separation, religion, reductionistic scientific practices, we have to go first and then find the elements and then make a periodic table, figure out what the atoms are, how the atoms are arranged and use microscopes. And then, whoa, guess what? Indigenous thinking was right on. It's a roundabout way to prove what so much ancient wisdom tells us, and then it's still the incomplete picture. It's not always about reductionist quantitative measures, right? Because we're connected to every other thing. Okay. Okay. Usually at this point in the podcast, I'm almost wrapping up, but we haven't really even gotten to application yet. All right. So I just said that we were going to get into the function, but then I went off on a little tangent again about lessons learned here. And I think that's okay. I'm not going to re-edit this and say that because I don't know. This podcast is feeling a little bit more like something that I'm going through right now too. So, but I will talk about the functions, and we're going to do that now. So the thing I love about this pattern, similar to waves, is that it's an action, and we can see the results of it when we see something that has just been scattered, but it really represents the action. And this has so many implications for how we move, how we communicate, how we use our energy. And we'll stick with the same two examples that we have been talking about here, which is, volcanoes and seeds. So scattering has a major role in creating the world that we see today, in creating the combinations for one plant to just happen to grow next to another, so then we see this wonderful symbiotic relationship develop. It's how things are launched away from their place of origin, sometimes fairly chaotically, to find a new way and to offer up something different, even if that something by our measures feels incomplete. It wasn't actually, because it served some sort of purpose there. And without the pattern of living things scattering, who knows really what our planet would look like, or if we'd even have a planet. So super important pattern. And there are two main points that I want to make here. And I'll make each one, and then we'll kind of connect back to our personal life and then classroom. So the first point is that scatter patterns take a ton of energy, either in the dispersal or in the creation. When it comes to dispersal, if you're thinking about a volcanic explosion that we were talking about before, right? That's a huge chaotic explosion. Then we have creation. Think about the amount of energy it takes for a birch tree to create 2 million seed pods, like a lot of energy when it comes to creating something that's going to be scattered, that maybe only 1 out of 2 million is going to is going to actually thrive, right? So at first glance, it doesn't seem like an efficient pattern such as spirals or branches, meaning it wouldn't be our first go-to for applying a function of a design if what we're really looking at is efficiency, right? We would go to some of those other ones that we've talked about. But it might be a go-to if our goal is creativity. And that's because scatter patterns release control. So we aren't planting seeds in rows and, we're sowing them all over the place and seeing what happens when X grows next to Y. And maybe nothing happens. That's the control release, right? Maybe something magical happens, though, because of a relationship that we didn't know could possibly exist and something totally new emerges. And in a world that is so tightly gripping onto control, maybe inserting some sort of practice of scattering instead of deliberately planting and crossing our fingers and anxiously waiting for the one seed that we planted to sprout, right? Okay, implications here for one track to a degree in college, right? That's your one thing that you're doing. I'll pause that for a second. But maybe it makes more sense in some instances to take the energy on the front end to create all these seeds and then release them or heave them, if you're going the volcanic route, out into the ether to see what happens to them. It seems like it could be an important way to shake off anxiety and predictability and really open up for possibility. And, as an educator, this might look like helping your students understand the creative process that you're doing in class, and which can be anything that they're creating, like a project or an essay or a report or a podcast or a painting, and then putting the goal of getting it out there over the result of the feedback that you get about how good it is necessarily, right? Putting it out there is a gamble if you use standards of measurement like we talked about with the full-grown tree. Putting your work out there, you might not ever even know that you have a full-grown tree, but maybe you had a bunch of saplings that added to the fertility of the soil. And so the chance is a lot better in the future for another seed to thrive. You see what I'm saying here? So we're in no place to measure some of these outcomes. I like measuring outcomes. I'm not saying get rid of it altogether, but sometimes we're just not in the place to measure the outcomes because we're too disconnected to do that. We're only around for 80 years if we're lucky. We're not omniscient. We don't know everything. We can't possibly know how what we put out there will affect everyone. It's actually totally irrelevant to worry about it in most cases. And if you're making something because it's a unique expression of you and you want to scatter it out into the world by putting it out there, all you have to do is be confident that that's what you're supposed to do because that's a unique expression of you. And there are so many plants whose method of seed dispersal, like we talked about in the lobes episode, is just being eaten and spread through their poo, right? I don't think that berry bush necessarily knows if the seed ever grew up to make its own seed. It just knew that it needed to make the fruit, right? That's uniquely what a blackberry bush or whatever does. Now, we all do live in a world where we base a lot of what we make on an economy that's based on industry. And so that means we have to make things that are useful for other people and that add to the economy often. And that often doesn't jive with our unique self or who we think we're here to be. And that's a reality that we have to contend with. So sometimes we do have to make things and create things that aren't necessarily a part of what our unique being wants to put out there in the world, right? But maybe we can also simultaneously create these practices so that we can move more towards that, because that is the world that we're trying to move towards. So I just wanted to share that too, that there is a reality out there that we do have to do things and make things and create things because of the world that we're currently living in. But let's try to move also towards this other world. Why are we trying to create? What is our fruit? What are our unique expressions, our unique way of being in the world? We're in this one unique body and this unique perspective for some sort of reason. Now, I didn't forget about the energy part. So remember that one of the characteristics of this pattern is that it is not a slow drip of sustained energy. That would be more like a branch or a net pattern that we talked about. This is a large amount of upfront energy required to create whatever needs to be scattered, and then maybe even to disperse it. And if we need a huge amount of energy to initiate this process, how are we going to get that energy? Okay. Thinking back to last week, do you have a net out? Are you practicing enough awareness to catch that energy that comes your way, even during the most mundane moments because you have your net out? Are you a volcano where all that energy is sort of just like bubbling up because you're just tending to it a little bit here, a little bit there, and then you're just waiting for the right time for it to explode, right? Are you kind of holding it in? This is an opportunity to really ask yourself, what makes you tick? How do you get into flow? How do you create something and then put it out there? So these are all great questions, all good food for thought, but how do we design the structures that allow scattering to be possible? So let's think of our own lives first. First of all, I would say we could create a space in our day to practice our awareness, really understand it, really understand what's nourishing us, really understand who we are. What is uniquely mine to do here? And I'm just mean like here generally in this world, not even related to teaching. And then we figure out what it is we want to create. What is uniquely wanting to come through us? Like, what is that thing in this present moment in time? That could be something different than 5 years ago, who you were, right? What is this thing? And then before we create the thing, we set up a method of dispersal. So maybe a celebration, a deadline, a final place where we're going to put it out there. You don't have to do this, but it can be really helpful for creating that structure for the dispersal. So maybe it's as simple as a deadline that you're telling yourself, you want to make an Instagram reel about something that you care about this weekend. It could be something like that. Or maybe it's a book you want to write. You create a deadline about sending a manuscript to your publisher to get it out there, send it to 5 different publishing companies. Or you want to practice making hors d'oeuvres. And so you tell your friends to come over at X date and try all your hors d'oeuvres, and you're just putting it out there. Or you want to tell all your family and friends, you want to make this big announcement, you're scattering it out there about your future plans, even though they're going to think it's kind of wild, right? Whatever it is, then detach from the outcome, because you're doing it, you're doing you, right? It might even be helpful to tell yourself about the tree that's dispersing seeds and only 1 out of 2 million grows up, and maybe none do from, season of 2020, season of 2019. Maybe you had no winners those seasons, right? But maybe in 2022, you drop your seeds, right? And 1 is going to start to grow. And first of all, you can't even see that without a good amount of time going. But secondly, all those other seeds that you've dropped in the past have created more fertile soil for the seed that you're dropping now. This is so similar to when you're working with students too. So the trick here is that a larger portion of your work as an educator would then need to be, instead of delivering objective A, B, C, right, would then need to be helping students see what they can uniquely put out into the world. I think that this is just almost like the pinnacle paramount job of an educator. Who are the individuals in your class? What can they put out into the world? And I know if you're working in a typical school that there are structures that are inhibiting you from getting to know your students. I totally get it. Are there ways that we can then do this in smaller ways, right? Maybe it's not as time consuming as it seems. And it can start with, hey, I've taught a lot of students, and the one thing that stands out about you as unique is that your writing voice has this really interesting dark humor, but a really funny tone to it. Do you notice that too? Have you ever thought about doing something with it? Stuff like that lands with kids, right? It sticks with us when we heard our teachers say something like that to us. And maybe your kids are too young that they're just starting to think of what to do. They don't really know what they're good at or what they like. Put all the opportunities out there for them to scatter their work, right? To try something and then scatter it about and see what lands and see what grows. Set up a channel for them to broadcast their poems, hang their work in the hallway, tell their friends and family about the work, create an occasion for them to share what they've created live or in person or recorded and put on the web. Once you've created the container for that scatter pattern, then we can think about how we're going to help them find the energy to create what it is that they're scattering. And like us, doing something that you're interested in is also the sort of nourishing closed feedback loop that needs little input. It's, it really self-nourishes. There might be often a hump that you have to get over that requires a little bit of energy. So you're giving your students some energy, like I said, like saying, hey, you're uniquely talented at X, or I've noticed you're really interested in this. And whatever it is, by telling them that you're so proud of their effort, you're helping them see what they're proud of too in their work, and give them time in that setting in class that is really good for creation. Silence, if it's music, if it's time outside, if it's time sharing ideas energetically, if it's tools that they need to create, right? Can you bring those in? Then help them detach from the outcome by telling them about the seeds and the trees, or some other story even that gets at the fact that the point is that if you are doing what is uniquely you and you're scattering that out into the world, you're doing it. You're doing it. You're doing it. Congrats. You're doing it. That's all that we can do. And with that, we're going to close out our series on specific patterns. Next week, I think Jess and I will maybe do a recap, a final culmination episode, which would be really nice. And as I was creating this outline this morning, I was kind of noticing that so much of this theme has to do with what we're talking about at our workshop for We Are Verbs on Tuesday night, the 10th, which is live, but will also be recorded. And you can join that for, like I said, $2 for 2 months with the code Teacher Appreciation if it's not yet Saturday, the 7th at noon, or you can use the code podcast if it's after the 7th, but you still want to join for 1 month for $1. For $1. It's only $1. Either way, the workshop is, practically free. We'd love to see you inside our group. The link is in the bio below. Thank you so much, everyone. This message hit really hard for me this week. And so I think I was talking from a place of really feeling this pattern as opposed to a structured format like we've been doing. And I hope that that still worked for you. I hope that you still got something out of it. May you find what is uniquely you and gives you loads of creative energy. And may you scatter it out into the world and beyond, detached from a controlling outcome simply because you're expressing your most unique self. And what else is there to do but that? Love you all.